It's 6 p.m. and this is the call to order to the special meeting of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District here on September 1st, starting at 6 p.m. And we have a quorum of Manager Anderson, Manager Taves, and Manager Schmaltz here, along with Administrator Kinney and Emily Hines. So I guess what I'm going to suggest today, this primary purpose of this meeting is to finalize the budget for the any changes we might want to make in the budget for the next meeting coming up in September 8th. And Jackie, if you're okay, I thought we'd start just with your line item draft budget suggestions.
Sure.
And then we could go into your any other questions we don't cover. We could go into your script with the answers from the staff also, and then get into discussion on some of those other items. Some of those will be more policy decisions that we're probably not going to get resolved tonight, but we can set up a plan and act and to move forward with them. So with that, Emily, do you want to start with the 2023 draft budget that Manager Anderson prepared? And we can go down that item by item.
Is this legible at this Zoom level? Try to zoom in some more.
Yeah, that looks good. Some of these we've already have acted on and have reallocated some dollars. Well, maybe we should go back and talk about what we're doing here. We've got $700,000 that was taken out of the Forest Lake alum treatment budget, and then it was reallocated based upon staff recommendations across other possible projects. And in the meantime, then Manager Anderson had also submitted some suggestions on how we might use that money. One of the things we should be aware of is that $700,000 was comprised of $200,000 of expenses that we are responsible for and $500,000 of grants. So when we set up the new alum treatment for Forest Lake, we went from, I think, $200,000 expenses down to $60,000, leaving $140,000 of expenses that we could reallocate, basically, without dipping in or changing the budget in any significant way from totals. So that's kind of what we're working with right now. So with that, let's start with the line items, and then Emily, you want to go through this on each one? You can make comments as we go.
Okay. So the first one would not be a change to, the budget numbers, as I understand it, or more just a formatting. This has been the codes for several years now, and so just changing it from 1001 4800 to 1003 4800 is how I understand it.
Right, so that's been taken care of and addressed. Why don't we go to the next one?
Well, does the board want to act on that that formatting change?
Oh, we have to approve that? I guess maybe we should at least take a consensus on it. So does the board have any objections to implementing what Manager Anderson suggested on the formatting of those four items?
None here.
Okay, I have no objection, and Jackie, of course, you don't have any. So we should go ahead with that and then do it, Emily.
Okay.
Unless Mike has some, unless staff has objections, but I think you said it was okay. So, so next item.
So some dollars have been added for the rules review item. I do think this comment is largely addressed, but maybe if Manager Anderson would want to speak more to that.
Well, no, I mean, it is what it is, and it's pretty simple, is that it's more than just our rules and that we have to deal with. We have to make sure that our implementing cities and townships are doing the right thing according to our rules. So every time they switch, or excuse me, every time they update their comprehensive plans, we should be reviewing those plans to make sure that they are capturing the intent of all of our regulations and rules. And I think you've addressed that. I'm having a little trouble with the microphone coming from your end. It's really soft, but I'm trying to figure out how to correct that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay, all right, very good. I think it's been addressed. I saw that there were some additional dollars in that category.
Yeah, maybe,
We're still
Emily, we
working
should-
off of the 24th, right?
right. We should,
Budget?
Emily, we should
Okay.
show that chart where you reallocated those dollars, just to refresh everybody's memory. If you can pull that up. The memo you sent out, which shows where the
Yeah.
700,000 went. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay, so here we are. And so this is basically how staff has reallocated those dollars. Some of which have gone, 3 or 4 items have gone to what Manager Anningen recommended, but then others have been in different areas and some of her concerns weren't addressed. So that's what we have to resolve tonight. So as we go down, this rules implementation, you can see we added $25,000 to that budget item.
Mhm. Yeah,
to
that
take
should
care
be
of her
adequate.
concerns. So that should be okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Emily.
I think that's the same story for the next one, the shoreline photo record. We added 20,000
Right.
to that line item.
Mhm.
So that one's done.
We wanted to discuss the Bone Lake AIS management, and it's also mentioned further down of that the board determine if all AIS are included in this program as district responsibility. So the current budget was kind of based on the last few years of budgeting for Blue Water Science to do the curly leaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil delineations on those 2 lakes, and then some budget dollars for curly leaf pondweed treatment. And so those costs align with the existing budget amounts. And so maybe the board would like to discuss expanding the AIS program and increasing those dollar amounts.
Well, I guess I can make a comment on this. In the past, we've basically forecasted based upon what we expect the treatments to be. And then normally there's, because of Forest Lake, we don't always use the money that's been allocated to Forest Lake. There's been money available to backfill if we have to backfill something else in another area if something's come up. So I would be comfortable in continuing to operate that way with how we forecasted this year. We're going to have money left over in the Forest Lake AIS budget again for this year. So if something comes up, we can respond to that. So we're just talking about mainly 310, 22G and 29G, correct, Emily? Yeah.
The whole point of this was that, 4,000 is not a lot of money. And so if something unusual occurred, then you're not going to have the budget dollars to address it. And we've talked about this in the past, but 4,000 is yes, you're trying to predict what's going to happen in the next year. Sometimes you're not accurate with that. And so I don't want that program to be in a deficit situation where you can't address something that was not expected. It's not a lot of money, but it's adding a basis so that we are providing the opportunity for that additional funds to be there by setting that minimum. Now, I remember that discussion pretty clearly, but we haven't done that since that time because of what you just said, Steve. There's always seems to be a little bit of extra in that AIS funding. But what if Forest Lake needs all of their money? We're going to have to, pull that from some other place instead of arguing about whether we should go forward with some type of treatment or not. I think this area is just too important, and that we have done a good job of managing that in the past. But if you're comfortable that Forest Lake is not going to be using their budget and some will be available if these other lakes need it, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but I just don't want to miss an opportunity to treat an AIS or a new one that comes in that we don't even have in our lakes right now. We do have that rapid response program. And so, you know, that's where this money would be utilized if these two lakes didn't need that extra 6 apiece. And if we had a new AIS bloom of some kind, or could be anything really, it doesn't have to be in the lake, it could be on the shoreline. But that's the purpose behind it.
So I guess I have a question for staff. I mean, we don't spend every budget line item down to the penny. So historically, we've been underspending a lot of areas. So don't we have a system today, if we need more money AIS, we don't have it in that area, but we're underspent in another area, can't we make a funds transfer request to fill in for that year to cover the AIS shortcoming?
Mr. President, managers, yes, that's exactly. We just did that, of course, with the Pewatin purple loosestrife so activity. And you know, if we wanted to put if we have some extra funds that we want to place someplace for AIS, I guess a thought that I had offered was just put it into the district-wide ongoing initiatives, and then it could be accessible for really any AIS in any lake, and be more flexible from that standpoint. So,
And I'm okay with that.
So you're suggesting we could put it into that area this year, Mike?
correct. It's the district-wide line item that we have at the top for EIS. Typically, we put a little in there for legal counsel.
Okay.
Well,
so-
and that's a good way, I think, to treat, you know, what I call the contingency fund. And this is really what it's about, is making sure that you have some extra dollars in especially important programs like this one. I don't know that 5,000 is enough. I would say 10 as a minimum.
So if we do that, in order to keep our total budget number the same, which we've kind of voted on last time, how do we do that? Do we reduce some other line item? Like maybe, for example, the extra money that we had was put into the account for purchasing land. So would that account be reduced by 10,000 then to keep the total budget the same?
Does this budget reflect that 700,000 that is not going to be used for Forest Lake?
Yes.
Yeah, the version 819 that we looked at has all those changes into them.
Okay, all right, good.
Into the-
Just want to make sure.
That's correct, Emily, right?
Yep, the total budget is 4.9 million on this one. And Forest Lake is lower, and other line items such as land acquisition have been increased.
So we would then put 10,000 in there and then change the 517,000 for land purchase to 507.
It would be a $5,000 difference. We'd increase the district-wide activity from 5,000 to 10,000.
Right.
So it would just address Manager Anderson's thoughts regarding having some funding available more directly just for AIS in a broader scenario.
Yeah.
Okay.
The concept I had initially was that we have, you know, this contingency fund. So we have we're building a reserve. In other words, we're not waiting until the end of the year, but we have that there for these unexpected expenses. But because we have these district-wide ongoing initiatives, I think that's in all of our categories, isn't it, Mike, this district-wide?
Generally, yes.
Well, anyway, I think we have something that's called district-wide in most of our major categories.
Yeah, or ongoing initiatives is.
Yeah, ongoing
put in.
initiatives, yeah.
Right.
And that's a good place to park some of those extra dollars so that you can see that it's in that same category that we might have additional needs for.
Okay, so we're recommending adding 5,000 to that account and taking 5,000 out of the soil purchase property purchase line. Is everybody okay with that? Doug, how do you feel?
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Okay.
keeping in mind that most of those purchases are going to be through grants or bonds of some kind, because they're going to be larger purchases.
Right.
Okay,
So Emily, can you keep a running tab like you did before and then issue out a final, take the original allocations you made and then add to that the ones we decide on tonight? So we have a record of it for the rest of the board also.
Yes, so reducing the land acquisition, we have that currently 90% of that is considered grant covered and it requires a 10% match typically for those land acquisition grants. And so we've had that 90-10 split of the revenue and then that locally funded. If we're going to reduce that by 5,000, we want to keep that 90-10 split, it would reduce those revenues. There's not the revenue associated with that expense being allocated to land acquisition. There isn't necessarily a revenue, well, unless we want to say we would apply for some kind of AIS grant. Is that making sense? Because these expenses are associated with the revenue and kind of an unrestricted, unallocated AIS expenditure. I'm not sure what outside revenue we would associate that with.
Well, can't we just reduce the loan amount that we have of that 500? You moved 517,000 over to the purchase of land area, so we'd only move over 512,000. And would you reduce that 728,000 by 5,000? Is what I'm suggesting. Does that make sense? So we don't have to change the total size of the budget.
Yes, we can do that. Forget what I said about the revenues. There's enough of a balance anyway that it'll be okay. Okay, I'm keeping notes.
Or is that going to come out from the overage we have? Because is that going to come out of the overage that we have? Because we have more revenue right now than we have expenses.
Yes, it'll come out of that.
Okay, so actually we're reducing the reserve that we would build with that money. Okay, that's fine. So next one.
which one are we on? 5-120A?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the volume control issue that you raised and
Okay,
working with
all
the
right.
city.
Okay, what I'm talking about here, I think there was something like 250 or 300,000 allocated for a storm control and volume control, and sediment catch basin of some type, so that the water coming out of Forest Lake, the stormwater, would be treated. And my question here, and the point I wanted to bring up, is that I don't know why the district should be responsible for the construction and maintenance of that type of a system. Cities are responsible for treating their own stormwater. Our role, as I see it, is to identify the need for that type of a treatment plant, if you want to call it, or project. And then the city is actually responsible for installing it and maintaining it, so that we don't have that ongoing maintenance expense.
Mr. President, managers.
And yeah, just one final thought, Mike, before you take the mic. Right now is a perfect time to also be encouraging the cities to get on the stick and put, especially Forest Lake, and to build up this system that actually should have been there decades ago. And there's so much money now available for infrastructure from the federal government. It would be wrong to not take advantage of the money that's available now. So that's my thought.
And now we're talking about, I believe, Mike, the MS4 budget of the city, right?
Well, there's actually, yes, this is not a very straightforward matter. One would think that all runoff is equal, but the district, so there is the MS4 and the city has a permit and a requirement to do that. And so presently we largely have three mechanisms for treating stormwater. One is through our just normal permitting. And then one of the things that we can do to offset for, this was originally for the downtown area, was the Stormwater Impact Fund. And so the district has a policy in which we collect, in lieu of being able to treat on site, a $40,000 per acre foot equivalent, if you will. And so with that, the district has received some funds, or I think that's the ratio, but the district has something like $90,000 that we have taken in from a couple different permits that are to go to, that are in the Stormwater Impact Fund, and which then would obligate the district to either construct wholly or in partnership with the city. However, whatever ratio the city would have, they could in theory sell or give to a developer to offset some permitting requirements. So the MS4 is just strictly the city's infrastructure and their own requirements per the MPCA permit. And then lastly is that we have, constructed projects through clean water funds, but technically, in a very technical manner, those should never be referred to as stormwater treatment facilities, because those are wetland enhancements or wetland restoration projects for that very purpose of being just what they're stated, and not stormwater treatment at all, even though they have the capacity to do the same thing. But we really work hard to communicate these are those types of projects are in fact wetland restorations or wetland enhancement types of projects. So so there's a variety of components to, or mechanisms to fund and construct various activities that would do similar things from a water quality standpoint. So I hope that's confused all of you now.
Well, let me throw out one more thing for Doug's purposes. Doug, the MS4 program is a program that is required by the city when it gets to a certain size to manage its stormwater. And there's a separate tax dedicated just to that purpose. And it's bringing in about $400,000, maybe $500,000 a year. And it's used to maintain stormwater ponds. I think it covers our street sweeping program right now. In fact, they shifted over the lake budget into that fund also. So any AIS treatment we do and so forth would be considered part of that fund too. So I think what Manager Anderson's asking is that we need to have them maybe try to get some additional grants to supplement that fund. Is that correct, Manager Anderson?
Well, it's to take responsibility for the treatment of the stormwater that's coming out of Forest Lake, and instead of us being the lead on that. And I agree with what Mike is saying about, our projects are primarily focused on restoring the wetland, but the wetland shouldn't be used as the primary filter for urban stormwater.
No.
There's too much else that comes in with urban stormwater that you don't want, chemicals, all kinds of things. And so that should be treated by the city. It's kind of the setup we have now off of Broadway. That pre-treatment pond is behind the retail businesses there. I forget the street number, but it's by that park. And that is treated there before it goes into the agricultural ditch, or what's now a tributary to the Sunrise. And it gets meandered through Bixby Park. That's a perfect example of that additional treatment before it hits the river system. So that's what I had in mind. I when I read that, and maybe I read it wrong, but when we're talking about regional treatment facilities, or projects, that's what came to my mind, is that we should not be doing the city's required treatment plants. They should be doing that. And if we have a wetland that it enters for final, filtering, that's all the better. Because the water is going to be very clean then as it goes down the river system and into our lakes.
But I think though, Manager Anderson, that if I recall correctly, we have responsibility for correcting all the historical problems that have existed that weren't treated. But once a stormwater facility goes in, then it's the city's responsibility to maintain that. Or if the city wants to build something that's going to cause stormwater, our permitting process would require them to make sure they make that construction in lieu of what our regulations are to protect the environment from the stormwater. So they really have no responsibility to go back and fix things, except for if a lake is impaired, the city legally has responsibility for fixing that. If I'm correct on that, Mike. Like Shields Lake should have been paid for by the city, but we did it for them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they are the legal entity that is responsible. However, there's no teeth with that, or there's no deadline or any really thing that says it, other than somebody maybe suing the city for not taking some particular action. But the MPCA permit through the MS4, the municipal storm sewer or separate storm sewer system, is just that. And so for Manager Taves, so the city of Forest Lake, bills their residents for that and all commercial facilities. City of Wyoming is now in MS4 as well. So they're proceeding with a lot of these similar frameworks, but they're in the small city category. So they have some different requirements. It'll be a while before I think Scandia gets there, but eventually it probably will be. And right now, so the city's interest in a lot of the stormwater pieces, we had partnered with that downtown study because they want to redevelop that. And if you recall, I think it was back in January that the report came out where they were looking to Granite Highway 8 redo. There's like a triangle there with MnDOT, and that they would want to pay to rehab that, and that would be the pre-treatment for everything. And as noted by Manager Anderson, then this cleaner water going, under the road and then into the wetland before it gets to the Sunrise. The city owns a small piece there. And then it's, the other is they're looking to redo that large stormwater pond off of Broadway to expand the capacity. Because what they want to do from a development standpoint is to have capacity there to, again, either, give to or sell to businesses as an incentive to come into Forest Lake and saying, hey, yeah, we've traded all this or treated all this, we've got capacity, if you will, to convert some of these homes along Broadway Avenue into commercial properties that would go from, a current 25-30% impervious up to a 75 or 80% impervious. So they're trying to anticipate that. And frankly, that's kind of been my longstanding effort, I guess, too, is to anticipate what would full build out look like, and will that combination of rules and actual improvements within these systems achieve a more sustainable water quality that is, just based off of maintenance and not necessarily new projects. So quite a few different things going on there, but right now it's kind of back into the city's hands to decide, what they're going to do where. But that report laid out what their intentions were, at least through the downtown component. That does not address the commercial areas farther to the west, but I believe that they are trying to take a look at that as well.
So basically it gets us back to this volume control area that we've been trying to find a location to build. So do we have to do more to encourage the city to move on that, or who has the lead on that, Mike?
Well, they have the lead on their own, but we still have a legal responsibility to deal with the money that we have on the stormwater impact fund. So at some point, the watershed district needs to do a project within that same drainage area. So there's really an incentive on our part to collaborate with the city and to create the offset that was basically funded by the dollars that the district had taken in.
Plus the fact, following up on Manager Anderson's suggestion, is there a possibility we could get additional funding through a grant to expand that 90,000 by, by 50% or so?
Well, yes, I think we could pursue some of that, just like the city did on that other area down at Rice Creek. Of course, that was a kind of different sort of project. They were basically, I think they got, if I remember the legislation that went through last spring, they were getting some $5 million to move some part of a judicial ditch to enhance an area for development. So not necessarily the outcome that we would be looking for. And I guess from my vantage point, it seems that Rice Creek is not necessarily trying to hold or store water, but rather make those judicial ditches functioning in such a way that they send more water downstream. And I don't think that's the goal for Comfort Lake Forest Lake.
So I guess the action item would be that we would maybe try to put more focus on this and try to put more pressure on the city to come up with helping us find a mutually agreeable location, which is what we talked about doing the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, just within the last few weeks, actually, I asked the EOR to come back to this topic that has been kind of on hold and to evaluate what we could be doing, and or at least, we have our monthly engineering meeting and just bring it up as a topic, either with Tim Olson or somebody. But I just feel that the best way, because of the differentiation between the responsibilities legally between the MS4, the stormwater permitting components, and now this stormwater impact fund, and then how we do projects for wetland restoration, that it's in the district's benefit to try to collaborate with the city and help fund and get some of that. It's whether or not the city would want to, if they did a project, if they would want to allow us to join in financially to gain some of the stormwater credits, so to speak, or if we would need to be doing something out on our own. So that's the thing that I'm really trying to get to a point on. So then it's clear. Ideally, though, the district would be able to be in a position to have additional credits sort of in the waiting to get the treatment now, and then be funded later by potential permits that are going to come in and for a variance, and want to contribute to the stormwater impact fund. But we can't project what that future would look like. But we can start, trying to evaluate locations for construction of these, and then, start looking for funding. And I think if you had a site ready to go, your application would probably fare better. So that's another reason why I was kind of directed EOR to start looking at this further and start getting in touch with Bolton and Mink and trying to get it off the ground again, because it's just been sitting since I think the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So as an action step, let me suggest that what we do is maybe you should try to go hold that meeting with the city and see what their response is, and then maybe give an update to the rest of the board, because we still have 2 other board members that aren't here that would benefit from this discussion, because it's a new area for them. And then at that point in time, we could decide whether we want to be more aggressive or whatever else you think we should do at that point. Does that make sense? It's kind of what you plan to do anyway, I guess, right? It's just
Correct.
may move it up a little bit, that's all.
Correct, yeah, that's fine. That sounds good.
Okay, now, Manager Anderson, you okay with that?
I am, but, that's been, I think, the purpose, all along. And maybe with the focus, now coming into the Comfort Lake areas where we're more impacted by the city, this will take a higher priority. And I meant this as a partnership, working with the city, not having, not having a contest with them or not having any disagreements with them, but the city needs to take charge of this. What really struck me is reading the delay is attributed to getting landowner and city agreements. Well, if the city is owning this project, they have many other tools available to them, and taking ownership of this, it becomes a city infrastructure project, like I was saying before. So that's the point, is that we shouldn't allow this to stall out for any reason. We should be there as the technical lead and advisors on this, always with clean water or quality of the water as our angle. So the fees that we collect from people in that high pervious areas of the city, those can still be used for the enhancement of these projects, so that we've got the maximum water quality coming out of them. So in that way, we can work in partnership with the money, but it really should be the city that's getting whatever agreements they need, easements, if they have to go to eminent domain, whatever they have to do, but we have to get these projects going. Sitting for 50 years is not acceptable as the city continues to grow out. We need to get a handle on it now.
Everything you say makes perfectly logical sense, except that you're dealing with the city.
Yeah,
And the city has its own priorities, and we've been through this for the Lake Association. I mean, if it's not on their radar, I mean, you really have to bring the big guns out to get them to move sometimes. And
yeah, and I think
we're not allowed to do that, being a LGU, but that's where we often use the Lake Association to bring that political power in to get something
that,
done.
and I think the presentation by the engineers has to be spot on as well, and how important these projects are to the continued health of not just the waters within our district, but also downstream into the St. Croix.
Right.
So I think properly positioned, the city will own up to their responsibilities and make this stuff happen. We can't wait another 30, 40, 50 years.
Right. So what I suggest is Mike go ahead with his plan, getting EOR involved again, meet with the city as a staff. If you're not getting an acceptable response, then perhaps, maybe we need to go talk to the council about how providing a bigger picture and a more historical picture on this, and see if we can't convince the council themselves to get on. That's how we've had most of our luck, is not convincing their administrator over there, but convincing the council that they should do this. And
Right.
so that's what I would recommend. If we can't make that next step, then you and I, or whoever's Mike, should go and make a presentation to the city and try to present a more larger and important picture on what the history has been and why it needs to be done before the future overtakes us. We
Mhm.
can't do much about it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay, moving on then. The next one is 5120B, which is the Greenway Corridor. And I think this is just a
Steve, before we leave
clarification.
that last topic, there was money allocated for that area, and it was substantial. I don't know if I wrote it down there, but I believe it was 100,000 or more in that category. Did we leave that?
40,000 for
Okay.
volume control facility.
Okay. And that's probably right for working the partnership angle. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Then down to 5120B, Greenway Corridor. There was a clarification question there. Mike, you want to tackle that, or Emily, one of the two?
Well, I just think that right now we've been trying to, beyond just that initial concept is what does the, flood protection, resiliency, and the things like that look like? And how do those overlap with all of this? I mean, right now we're very actively working on all the materials for that Bone Lake South project, and to see what comes of that, including some other new potential partnerships that Emily has been helping with on that. But so I just think in general, because as we heard from the gentleman from Dakota County, if the watershed district was to do Greenway corridor planning, it would be the first of, such a endeavor. But I think that, we're presently trying to work on some other things, including the H&H modeling and things, and really trying to figure out, what that effort would really look like. And so, again, it's kind of pivoting from largely a phosphorus and water quality effort to this larger, wetland enhancement, flood protection, resiliency against, larger, wetter seasons or more drought or whatever it is going to be, or more extremes, I guess. So I don't know if we really have an answer to your question or what that would be, because, again, this really needs to be a board-led discussion and vision.
And I think right now, this idea of having to relocate is kind of taking precedent, because we found out that you can burn through a lot of money on this visioning stuff pretty quickly. So I think we all became a little gun shy when we saw how quickly the money can go. So I'm comfortable with just leaving it where it is and see what happens with that at that point in time.
My point here is, let's get back to what the original discussion was about, which is providing more capacity along the Sunrise River. When there's heavy rains, it's been ditched now since the early 1900s, and it was a meandered river system before that. So I don't know why we're jumping into all this other stuff right now. I think that for me, the core of this concept has always been to reestablish that river system corridor, so that you do have on the main thoroughfare through our district is the Sunrise River. So if we just expand that, and that would require buying some easements or getting some easements or conservation donations. However we do it, we restrict ourselves to that Sunrise River corridor without going into, all this joint park stuff and so forth. That can come, but that's not really our focus. So that's probably enough right there, but I think with the update of the H&H reporting, we can pick up that conversation and have a more in-depth.
Yeah, I think the board will have to come together on this and say, okay, we'll accept that premise of that to start with. Maybe we should just start with the Sunrise River rather than trying to figure out everything else. But I think the board has to make that decision. And right now we haven't got that unity. So
yeah, well, that's what I thought it was. Honestly, we just have to, I think, have that discussion and reestablish that focus or expand it. That was why I asked the question. So I agree that amount is okay. It was the concept more that I was concerned about.
okay. Moving ahead then, everybody okay with that? We'll move ahead then. We've got two more items that maybe can be looked at together, 5229D and E. And maybe Mike or Emily want to comment about staff's answer on that?
Mike, do you need to take this one?
Shallow Pond, yeah, I was just trying to get back to my notes here. And so we had started a few years ago doing the inlet and then the outlet. We've been doing the inlet for a few years prior, but the outlet just in more recent years to understand that. And it's a pretty big undertaking. We anticipate that this kind of goes to the very last sort of comment or discussion that Manager Anderson made about looking at these wetland systems in greater entirety. And in fact, I've been just communicating with the OR about running some scenarios for different pieces and really trying to understand where within the drainage systems that we would want to focus our efforts, because they would not necessarily all be equal. If we're using our Pareto principle, we would want to try to work on and identify those best to our ability. That being said, for Shallow Pond, what we think we can do is have a small riser or constrictor on the culvert that goes under the city street. There's a park there. I can't remember. It's like 258th or something street. And hold water back a little more into Shallow Pond. However, from the fact that we've been monitoring the inlet and the outlet, and the Shallow Pond is a sink for phosphorus, that's a little bit alarming to me, because the focus then would be not necessarily to enhance the capacity of Shallow Pond to be an even greater sink, but rather to address the sources upstream that are inundating the Shallow Pond to begin with. Because the last thing we want is to sort of use up the capacity of the filter, sort of like your kidney, and then it fails, and then it becomes a source. So from that standpoint, from a greater picture systems, I think that we're better off trying to identify this stuff farther upstream of Shallow Pond. Certainly our Highway 61 project is one component of that, but we're not done in part of that, because we're still trying to get out there with our CAP monitoring to really still dial in some of these nuances of what's coming into the overall system.
Yeah, my other comment here and several other places is looking at the sediment load. I mean, it's obviously coming from that old ditch system, and so it's not just phosphorus. And phosphorus isn't the problem anymore. It's sediment. It's always been sediment, and urban, like I was getting at before, that urban input also that brings in the more chemicals and metals and so forth, and we're not really checking for that, but we should be in the Comfort Lake area because of our ditch. We're so thoroughly ditched, and it reaches all the way west of Highway 35 in Forest Lake, where all of that commercial development and now the multi-housing boom is all part of that whole system that drains into Shallow Pond and then eventually Comfort.
A quick
And I don't
question.
see a lot of that. So I wanted to make sure that we have that out front and in the open, so that we're not forgetting that part of it.
Where is the Shallow Pond?
It is on the Sunrise River, south of Comfort Lake, and north of the district's property, and into Chisago County. I think Emily's trying to pull up the map.
It's Greenway Avenue, if you know anything about that area.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you just circle around Greenway Avenue and you'll see Shallow Pond on the right-hand side as you're going north. It's identified on the oldest maps, so it's always been there.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Huh. Thank you.
Mhm.
I wasn't aware of that.
It
Is it
was
just a big
donated some
screw?
years back to the Audubon Society, I believe. So it's very natural. It's very pretty. So we just we want to make sure we're not destroying that over the next 30 years.
Yeah, it's not entirely owned by the Audubon.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I wish it was. There's actually a fair number of property owners on that west
Yes,
side
that's
that
true.
that we have to deal with as well. So there's further complications from that standpoint. So one of the things then that when I had asked to set up on the outlet of Shallow Pond, because one thing we didn't really understand was what was happening in the channel or the Sunrise River between the outlet and Comfort Lake. And the reality is that, and I previously had Interfluve out to look at it as well, but all the data is just saying that the amount. So while there's sediment being discharged from the system, it's not I'd say an unnatural amount or an excessive coming that it's either aggregating or or eroding out of that overall system. So unfortunately, actually, what's coming into Shallow Pond is largely just tended to stay there or build up. Obviously, some of it's making it through, but it's a very peculiar system, and for whatever reason, for many years, it was shown as an open water entirely. A lot of older maps show it as an entirely open water feature, and not Comfort Lake, which is even more surprising. So, and one of the things I have staff working on is then, looking at trying to pull together more old plat maps and survey notes from the, late 1830s, early 1840s in the area, and try to put together a little bit more of an understanding or story of what the landscape was like within the district as a whole, and prior to when we can actually see it in the aerial photography, because in that area was such that by the time we get to the 1937, there's a lot of the land was largely cleared and farmed and or grazed, so we can't really use those pictures to give us an indication of what things were like, and also a lot of the ditching had already been completed.
Hmm.
So, did we lose Mike or?
No, I'm here. I just have nothing further to add to that
Okay,
discussion. So, thank you.
The next
Jackie, are
one
you
on this
okay?
is the Forest Lake urban retrofits. And these are the dead end streets. Is that what we're talking about here? Those
So
110?
These are actually in the Comfort Lake Management District. They were identified originally through the Sunrise River Engineers Report.
Mhm.
And I believe that Megan Funky and EOR had looked at them a little bit more closely as part of the Comfort Lake Diagnostic Study. It's just not draining to Forest Lake, but in the city of Forest Lake, draining to Comfort Lake. Just urban retrofit projects that we could do within those neighborhoods, and as well as kind of the big box stores like the Menards area
No.
and Home Depot and whatnot.
You're talking about the ditch system that comes out of the north end of the city and wraps around the Highway 8 ditches and so forth. There's quite a lot of water that comes through after a rainfall where the nursing home is on Highway 8. It comes north, it goes north around and near parallel to Highway 8. And that ditch system, I think that carries that is the one that you see at an angle on that wetland to the north. Okay. All right. And there are probably 8 or 9 culverts along Highway 8 that empty from Forest Lake, North Shore Trail into Chisago County. So that's what you're talking about, right? That's sub watershed.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up where they are located. It was a whole list of like rain gardens and iron enhanced sand filters and things like that. I
Yeah.
was hoping for a map or something, but I don't have it here. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's
well-
kind of that other.
Yeah,
part of
well,
downtown.
once again, instead of the district shouldering that $190,000 burden, and I don't think that we should be owning these things. I think we can again help in this area with getting grants for the city and indicating, doing the planning for it. So making sure that they are where we want them to be, but not taking the ownership. That's still part of Forest Lake's infrastructure for stormwater.
But
So I
again,
don't want that
Jackie, that's something-
190,000 to be part of our budget. I think that we can identify the cost and tell the city that this is going to cost 190,000. You know, we will direct it. We will work with your staff, you know, or your engineers and so forth. But we're the actual overseers so that we know that it's put in correctly and it's got the right engineering for what we want to accomplish.
But again, Jackie, that's a retrofit situation,
Yeah,
and the city doesn't have to touch that at all. I mean, how much did the city give us for Bixby Park?
how much did they give us?
Mhm.
Nothing. They still own the land there.
I know, but that's why they're not gonna pay for this one either. So I think we have to just, eventually we want to do that, but I think it's a high cost projects and we can put it on the back burner and do it as a capstone effort after we get the major things done for Comfort and Little
Well,
Comfort.
this sounds pretty major. You know, I haven't seen the engineering. I haven't seen the study that says how much water, what the volume of water is, or what kind of contaminants are coming in. But I just want to make sure that we're not taking on more maintenance responsibilities into the future that we don't need to. We can certainly direct these projects and identify them, but we should not own them.
After they're built,
I'm sorry?
after they're built, you mean? Yes, I
Yeah.
agree with.
Mm-hmm. And so I don't know that, is this in the budget for this coming year?
No,
Okay,
because we have so much else going on with Comfort, and Little Comfort. We want to see how things settle out
yeah,
before we move into some of the smaller, higher cost projects. And we've got the same backup sitting on Forest Lake also. We got a lot of projects that we could do for $3 or $4 or $5 or $8,000 a pound.
yeah. Well,
But we're not doing that.
It's in this category or this code area for our budget. So I'm assuming that's what we had intended to spend.
Well, as part of the 10-year plan update, we had put together that 10-year estimated budget.
Yeah.
Kind of just general estimated timelines for some of these things and some costs that the engineer came up with. So
Yeah.
it was in the 10-year plan, but we didn't anticipate budgeting for it in 2023.
Yeah, and then the comment over on the notes side, the may not be necessary, and that's because of the phosphorus, right? So you got to look beyond phosphorus in the Comfort Lake area. It's not a phosphorus problem. Sediment loading, it's all the junk that's coming through that ditch system. So I wanted to make sure that that's noted as well. Okay.
Yeah, and we have had EOR looking at that and a presentation, and we can pull that information forward as well.
Mhm. Good. Okay,
Okay, moving on then. Groundwater,
well, first, I asked why under 5-229F, we're using the SWCD for this. Must be some type of a analysis, I would imagine. And then I referenced the 3000-4. I think that's what's on the budget line item too.
So all of our design work for any shoreline work has been per our agreements with either Chisago or Washington SWCD. So they help with our plant grant program or anything that we do beyond that.
Okay.
So
So this is, if you can move over to the left a little bit so I can see that column, that first column. Are there any notes over there? No. So you're talking about individuals that want to do something on their shore, Mike, that SWCD would do the design work for that? Is that what that's meaning?
correct, coming out of the plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right.
But I think also, we've had this long conversation in our, we'll get to this at a future meeting, is just what will our future cost share program look like in our in terms of our shoreline restoration, because we have a pretty aggressive goal
Yeah.
for restoration. And
Mm-hmm.
so at some point, this will be more pertinent.
And developed out, okay,
Yes.
all right. This comment is pretty self-explanatory. From the information that we collected in our diagnostic work and H&H modeling and all of that, that area on Highway I-35 and Highway 8 was listed as a very sensitive area for groundwater. And I'm not sure what we've done to educate Forest Lake and other, the city itself, I mean, about that, but we should be really, really forward leaning on sharing that information so that we're not going to have development in an area like that where we want to protect the groundwater. And that might be somewhere, as the city expands, that they want to put their water tank and so forth. And so we want to make sure that that area is protected. So I'm not quite sure how that information gets shared with the city. Mike, is this something that you do regularly or in your weekly meetings with them? Or what I'm asking here is that we make sure that we're sharing this kind of technical data that we've spent a lot of money collecting for the good of the district and the cities, and making sure that where we have areas that we can protect, we should be protecting them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe we can make a note about discussing it with them, but that, as I recall, they have it in their comp plan. We've shared this with some of these layers with them when we were doing our watershed management plan. So they're aware of that. And of course, they would be required by the DNR to have a wellhead protection plan in place for all any location where they would have a municipal well, and those are pretty encompassing. But
yeah, well,
it's a
I
point
just think that this
well
is one of the
taken,
more
because it's
important roles that we have. We're cleaning up mistakes of the past. What we call legacy issues. Well, legacy issues are grounded in lack of knowledge. And so the cities, the township boards, they proceed with their developments with just sort of that old mindset, not thinking about impacts to groundwater or lakes and rivers and so forth. That's what we do. We're the technical experts within our boundaries. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that we don't see the mistakes of the past being repeated, and that would, you know, save a lot of heartache and damage to the waters and so forth if we can get all of our communities to use this data in their planning.
Yeah, and probably from that standpoint, it would not hurt. I think I recall seeing one layer that we have from like the MPCA that shows entities or businesses that have enterprises that could be providing some sort of risk to groundwater based on activities.
Right.
And yeah, certainly, you know, the thing that I've always known is that the well protections are, you know, the depth at which we're drawing the water is so deep, they don't really get to anything that's more at a closer superficial areas that could either impact coming out as base flow, you know, into a stream or water body, and or private wells more locally.
Right. Yeah, and this is an area where we probably want to use engineers, you know, to do those kind of detailed presentations. I'm sure you can handle that too, Mike, but it gets overwhelming when you have to, you know, repeatedly do this for the different cities. So that might incur some additional charges from the engineers, but it's not going to be a routine thing. It's going to be as needed. But we really need to make certain that they understand this data that we're collecting and use it in their planning. Because otherwise we're just going to go down the same rabbit hole over and over again.
Groundwater was a kind of a lower priority in our 10-year plan, and that it comes later on. But I think the idea of protecting what we do know about right now isn't going to cost us a lot of time or money. And it's something, as you said, as an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
So we could probably try to get that information to them and hopefully have them react to it and be aware of it. So I think,
and
Doug, how do you
use
feel
some
about
of
that?
those additional dollars. You know, we can transfer money in there as we need to.
Doug, you have any thoughts?
How is it determined that an area is groundwater sensitive?
Largely comprised of the known soils in the area. So there's a lot of sandy gravel.
How quickly contaminants can get into the aquifer?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
basically it. I mean, if you got sand all the way down or gravel, it's going to go right into the aquifer quickly. Otherwise, if it's all shale on that, it's going to take years and years and years for it to get down there. So I think that's really what the concern is, isn't it, Mike? Getting a spill or something that could get in there and get down in and ruin the aquifer?
Correct. You were more succinct in your description. Yes.
Isn't farming also a source of nitrates into water wells then?
Absolutely.
Yes, 100%.
Well, we have so many blue babies in South Washington County.
Yes, I'm sure it's a problem in that area of, especially with that. There's some farming activity in Wyoming that has caught my attention.
So out where I was farming, it was people feeding cattle out so too close to their yards that they were getting nitrate down into their wells from the livestock.
Yeah.
Doesn't take much to make it happen.
Jeez.
Okay, so we're going to follow up on that one then also, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then moving on to the next one, which I think we've taken care of. This is where we're trying to provide more money for updating our shoreline audits or whatever records. So we did move some money over to that.
This is actually the lake grant program that's in our budget, and Little Comfort wasn't counted in the earlier information. So I'm just noting here that there are 6 basins. We're doing this on a basin basis initially, so it just needs to be bumped up from 75 to 90 to cover that. And this is obviously something that we're going to be talking about at the next meeting, and is subject to projects. So it's not something that gets used every year, but we need to allocate. And if it's not used, then it gets shifted to some other area in the budget. And then the last one, the 3-011, I think, Mike, you were referring to this earlier, or maybe it was you, Emily, brought it up, but the board has to decide, we brought this up a couple months ago, whether or not the board wants to see that AIS program expand to include all AIS.
Yeah.
So that's to be determined, by the board.
Right.
Mhm.
I guess that, I guess I wasn't, Mr. President, managers, I wasn't sure exactly the criteria for the basins. I mean, that I'll just note that the Little Comfort doesn't have its own lake association.
Mhm.
But,
Oh, well, it's part of, it's Comfort Lake. It's Little Comfort and Big Comfort together. That happened about 4 or 5 years ago, the combination.
Yeah, well, I guess from an administrative standpoint, I'll say it's rather disproportional.
Mhm.
With the 3 basins of Forest Lake comprising 1,000 residents, and this would be 30,000 for, well, 15,000. I'm not even sure if there's 15 residents on Little Comfort. So
Mhm.
from an optics standpoint, and also we would, need board consensus on making that switch. We'd have to, I think, as you noted, we have to make an adjustment within the budget, but
Mhm.
so
I don't see a 3004D anywhere.
in fact,
It's the commercial community grant. It's all put together. See, the 75 is there in the under ongoing.
But what number is it under?
It's that one. It's the 3-004-D. That's how our program was developed. These other, is this all? Yeah, ag and rural BMPs. Is that something?
Oh, I see. I've got it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, there's only 3 lake associations. So
Uh-huh.
if it's the lake associations, you don't need 6. We don't need 90. 75 is way more than we'll ever use.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just pointing it out. If we're going on that basin calculation. And it's small, I have no issues with that. It doesn't get used if there's not a program for it.
Right.
And it can stay at 75. I'm not
Okay.
helped up about it. I just wanted to point it out.
Yeah, I think we have to get the program put together first, and then we may have to
Mhm.
put it more if it's a stronger program.
Yeah,
And then this 3011, this has to do with your Asian water milfoil, whether we include that as part of AIS or not. And
that's
I
correct.
think the board has to rediscuss that again. So
Yep.
uh,
I
I'm
think
not so
that's
much,
it.
I'm not so much concerned about covering Forest Lake's cost right now. It's less than 50,000 a year.
Mhm.
But what I am concerned about is having to cover 10 times that amount if it gets into all 3 lakes.
Right.
So, and I'm not sure we want to take on that bullet as a board, but without getting more skin in the game from the lake owners and so forth. But that's what we have to talk about.
Mhm.
So I don't think 45,000 is going to, by not having in there, is going to break us right now. I mean, the Lake Association of the city's paying for it right now, so we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Yep. All right. That's it. I think that's all the comments.
Okay. All right. So the other question we had, I don't know whether you had a chance to see the cash flow analysis that was done
Yeah.
Doug and Manager Anderson. So
Mhm.
I think we're in pretty good shape as far as the first 6 months and the second 6 months of next year.
Mhm.
So I think with what we've got in the budget right now, we should be okay. But we could go through that if you'd want to. Mike, are you comfortable with that? From what you've seen?
Yes, I think it's probably a good reminder for everybody. And there is a fund balance policy in the governance manual that the board approved a number of years ago that, helps, I guess, understand some of the nuances of it, but also I know there's this sort of concept that we want a third of the budget for that first 6 months, but really the thing, and Emily and I went through it, was, if we took out projects and then land acquisition, and then if we had administration and programs, we really kind of need to look at what our historical expenditures are for that first 6 months, and that really gives us a better indication of what we're likely to need for that same period. And so, in this particular case, it gets us pretty close to the same number. But, there may be a scenario where a lot of it is, or we may have very few projects and the budget is such that a third may be a little bit deceiving, and we would want to have a little bit higher number for that to carry through for the 6 months, because it really is going to be more of the just general district operations, through administration and programs. So I think it's something for us to continue to pay attention to, I guess, is trying to say. But this year, yeah, it looks fine.
So what you're saying is, in the years where we have a lot of big project grants, we're pretty much safe, because if we don't get the grant, we don't spend the money, and therefore we don't have to incur the expenses. So, but in a year where we don't have a lot of grants, but we're still spending a lot of money, we got more expenses than are ours for the whole year, right?
Well, if our reserve on target is 1/3 of the budget, then, if the budget was six million, the reserve fund would be 2 million. But, and that would, but if that was the case where 4 million of the budget was projects and 2 million was administration and programs, then no problem, we'd spend, $1 million in the first 6 months and not have an issue. But if we had very little in the project side, and we're more into the operation and maintenance and programs such, and say our budget goes down, and so our other operation and some of our other program costs and administration stays fairly, but it goes up in a continuous fashion, our current trend.
Okay.
If we had a budget, say half as much, 3 million, and so if our target was a third and we went to $1 million, we'd get awfully close to that number, which then I would not be as comfortable with.
Okay. All right. Are there any other issues or questions we have to talk about? Otherwise, I think Emily's gonna make a record of what changes we agreed to today, and then maybe also we can list what follow-up actions we decided on doing. Some of these are more policy, longer-term policy issues
Mhm.
that are going to receive a little bit more attention as we move forward here in the next year and a half.
Yeah.
So we should capture those also, I think. I've made some notes here. I'll send you some thoughts too on that, Mike. But
Okay.
But otherwise, I think we're good to go for September 8th.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I think it would help the board if we could reconcile the grants on a more timely basis rather than waiting until the end of the year. These numbers, I was particularly struck by how clear it becomes. These pages aren't numbered, but it's the fund balance projection starting point page in the presentation. Yeah, here we go. This really lays it out pretty clearly, especially that top bullet point of what we're dealing, well, the whole thing basically, but it's explaining in clear numbers and fashion exactly what is comprised of that large amount in our savings account. And that's been the real nut to crack, as far as I'm concerned, all along, is that we don't have any clarity as a board on what those funds really are. And so this breaks it down. But a lot of it, I think, is just in the process of doing that reconciliation when we get grant dollars in, because, you know, it's a reimbursable scenario. So we have to expend those dollars to get us to, you know, the project start point. And a lot of that is reimbursable. So if we, or excuse me, is coming out of our tax levies and not the non-dedicated revenue streams. But if we can reconcile, when we get that first 50%, for example, and we can reconcile that against the expenditures that we've had coming out of the non-grant revenues, everything becomes very clear. And we basically, if you look at this, we're very close to having the levy amount reimbursed by our grant projects. And so that's what you end up with at the end of the year. So I think we should work on getting those things, you know, done on a more timely basis. So whether it's quarterly or monthly or whatever, it really helps. But anyway, I'm glad to see this. It's something I've wanted for a long time. And as I said at the last meeting, and it just really brings home that we've got the balances that we need to make it through that first 6 months.
Yeah, good job, Emily and staff on that. I think that was helpful. And we should, and the whole board can see this, and maybe we can go through it quickly at the next meeting if we have a chance, just so everybody sees it at the same time and has any questions. Doug, did you have any other questions on anything that we've talked about tonight, or anything else in the budget?
No, this slideshow, the sheets are pretty, they were very clear. I like that.
Okay, good.
Everything else seems to be good in order too.
Okay, with that then, unless anybody has any other topics, I can move to have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a second.
I will second that.
Okay, I'll do a roll call. Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz, aye. Manager Taves.
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
meeting. Thank you. Thanks
Thanks,
for your
Emily.
suggestions, Jackie.
Mike.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Emily, for all the good work.
Mhm.
Yep, thank you.